Hey guys, this is going to be a really special panel. And I know we're all Bitcoiners, and a lot of people got into Bitcoin without having a history of traditional markets. I teach people how to be traders, and the first question I ask them is, have you ever traded before Bitcoin and crypto came into your life? And it's amazing how many people raise their hand and say no. And it's a different world when you start to learn how to trade through Bitcoin. And that's one of the topics we're going to cover. And the other one is, the role of traditional finance and what's happening. So we do have more microphones. There you guys go. Boom and boom. And we're going to do quick introductions because not everybody everyone knows Max. And a lot of people. So we're going to do quick intros. I mean, Max doesn't really need an introduction, but we'll start here. Let's go, Alex. Give a quick intro.
Yeah, how you doing, guys? My name's Alex Massioli. I'm the head of institutional services at a company called Bequant Group. We are a global prime broker and synthetic margining desk for crypto hedge funds.
I'm Ugly Old Goat. Oops.
Is that on? There you go.
I'm Ugly Old Goat. And my friends call me by my first name, okay? Don't call me Mr. Goat because you're not my friend. If you say ugly, I respond.
These introductions are crazy. Tone, and great to be here, folks. I'm John Nigerian. I've been a trader for 38 years, so not as long as Ugly. I'm going to call him by his first name. Not as long as Ugly, but I've been a trader for 38 years. I was a football player for the Chicago Bears for 4 games, got cut, went down to the trading floor, traded down there from 1981 until 2004, sold our firm to Citadel, biggest hedge fund in the world at the time, and then we created a algorithm for trading, which I'll blend into the conversation here. And then we created a brokerage that we sold to E-Trade in 2016. And I've been on Fox News and then CNBC for the last 20 years talking about what we actually trade rather than just being a journalist. Nothing wrong with journalists. I'm just saying I'm not a journalist.
And your trading expertise is options, because I read your book back in 2003 or 4, was it? Something like that.
I've written or been part of 7 books. My brother and I have written 4. I wrote 1 by myself. Trade stocks, options, futures, knockouts, binary options, you name it. Bitcoin was just the latest and greatest. And, trading's trading, folks. So I'm sure we'll blend that into the conversation here.
Yeah, and Max?
Well, it's great to see John Nigerian up here. He's a pure trading beast. He comes out of Chicago, which is the heartland of America's trading population. And he does a great job on CNBC. And I've been talking to him for years and years about different stuff. But it's great to see John on this panel and at this conference because it shows where this whole industry has been, where it's going. And you're on the vanguard to open it up to a huge audience of traders, and I think that's a necessary part of the growth story going forward.
And we're going right back to John. We're gonna start with you because the big question is institutional money coming? When is it coming? Did it already get in? And you deal with a lot of hedge funds. You deal with a lot of institutional clients, private clients, like without, dropping names, obviously, which you wouldn't be able to. Are people just wishful thinking that institutions are coming, or are they really coming? And is it more publicly like, hey, let Fidelity be the custodial, or like, hey, we're a family office. You may be a consultant for a family office. And they're like, hey, John, can you connect us with someone that can teach us how we can hold Bitcoin ourselves and that no one really knows because we can invest in anything we like? So what are you hearing on the inside about Bitcoin?
Sure. Tone's right, folks. That leading question is leading me into this. Institutions are getting involved. A lot of folks on Wall Street are getting involved. Mark Lazary, who runs, I think, Avenue Capital or something like that, several, $5 to $10 billion hedge fund. He put, I think he said 5 or 10% of his net worth into Bitcoin when it was down at 5,500 to 6,000. And this was like a year and a half ago. And he did that because he said, I really see the potential for this. I know an awful lot of more of the regular Wall Street crowd would be involved if they knew more about the custodial stuff that Alex does, because Alex deals with a lot of the institutional side, and most of them have a problem that we can get to in a bit with the portability of the asset. In other words, somebody could walk off with it. Allegedly at Citadel, again, one of the firms that I've dealt with a lot, somebody walked out one weekend with 82 million in Bitcoin. You've never heard ever about somebody walking out with 82 million in Apple. Hasn't happened. So that's one of the reasons that there's been some trepidation about getting into the space. Doesn't mean that it'll stay there forever, Tone. I think that some of these guys will overcome it, that the growth of Bitcoin in particular, Ethereum right behind it, the folks that are focused on those are feeling more and more comfortable. And the FOMO, the fear of missing out. A lot of these folks that have a lot of assets now that have been lucky enough to run big hedge funds for them, for their benefit as well as their clients, are looking to diversify, and they look at this as an asset class that very well could be 20, 50,000 within 12 months, 18 months, and so forth, and they want to be part of that ride.
All right, so we'll head over to Alex with the same question. I mean, you known John for a while, and you're dealing with traditional institutions as well. What are you hearing from your side, from the traditional guys? Are they getting in?
Yeah, no, a lot of them have had exploratory teams for the last 3 to 4 years. What we're seeing now is those exploratory teams start to come back to fruition of the investment theses actually making sense. So, it's interesting. It's interesting. So we advise a couple of corporate pensions in cryptocurrencies, and it's usually the young person in the investment committee that's raised their hand to say, "Hey, let's take a look at it." But those institutions had to make sense of it, and there was really no track record for investments in it. But they're getting very close, and I think it's going to jump from the high net worth families to the institutions next on allocations.
And Max, what are you hearing from your channels? I'm sure you're still in touch with your old banking boys, right?
Sure. It's for a long time the discussion was about what is this asset? It's an asset. It's a new asset class, but is it a commodity? Is it a currency? Is it a hybrid? What exactly is it? It's tough to classify it. And in my view, it is really the first new asset class we've seen in probably over 100 years, 150 years. It's actually a brand new asset class. And that's in itself remarkable. So then there's no institutions, there's no regulatory framework, and there are no products that are catering to this particular asset class. So Wall Street is, in the 80s when I was a broker, it was a very creative place. Mike Milken, and Drexel were creating and inventing securities on the fly and marketing these, and anyone could buy a company using a leveraged buyout. You go to Michael Milken's X desk in Los Angeles, and you can buy any company in America, and it was very, very threatening. But it showed that Wall Street had graduated from stocks and bonds and fixed commissions to negotiated commissions and financial engineering, a very creative period. So this, for most Wall Street, they should see this as an extension of this creative process that's been going on for a few decades of financial engineering, creative engineering and a re-examination of what makes a financial asset. Now, I guess the biggest question would be, if I own this, am I hedging something or am I net long something, right? Is this going to give me exposure to what exactly? Is it catastrophe insurance? Does it trade like gold? I mean, how does it fit into the portfolio? If I'm creating a portfolio designed to have the minimum amount of risk with the biggest bang for the buck. Like, what is this hedging? Where does it fit in? And I know from the folks at Morgan Creek Capital in Raleigh, and I think they're probably one of the bigger names in this, they're just saying get off zero. Like, we don't even know what this is yet, but you should get off zero. Just even put 1%, because if you go back and work out what your returns would have been in the last 5, 10, 15 years, even with a 1% exposure to Bitcoin, you've got a 200 basis point improvement in alpha, in performance. For that, you're risking 1% to make 200 basis points. That's a fucking awesome trade, right? So that resonates. That makes sense. You know, that tickles the Wall Street id.
Gotcha.
Meaningfully.
Thanks for that update. I'm going to change gears slightly. I'm going to ask a question more related to trading, and we'll let Ugly kick it off, and then John Najarian as well from being an active trader. So, and it also goes into the concept of how you got into this space. So, Ugly, you were a commodities trader back in the day when probably before options even began, or just as options were starting. And then everyone knows your story. You had to take a long layover. And you came back, and Bitcoin gave you an opportunity to do it all over again, starting with a tiny amount of capital. And it was your skill as a successful trader that basically got you here. Joe, tell us what Bitcoin exchanges did right compared to the traditional exchanges you used to trade on.
Well, I don't think any of the exchanges were doing too much right until BitMEX came along. And whenever I mention, some of you may not agree with me, but and I'm sure that many of you don't. But I'm going to every time every time I say Arthur Hayes, I take my hat off to the man because I have the deepest respect in the world. You don't really understand.
A little different in my case.
Yeah, but I understand
Anyone
why
that knows
he had
my
to do
story.
what he did. I understand it. You got to remember, he's
It was totally my fault, I admit
yeah,
it.
but he's so innovative, and I still can't lock in my VPN. But anyway, he was so innovative that I'm sure that the crap he's getting from the CFTC is coming from the major exchanges because he's just beating them by light years. You've got innovations in there that we did not have. We had margin calls. I could get wiped. You can lose a lot more than you have in your account. You can't with BitMEX, okay? And yet he developed the perpetual futures options with funding, which never existed before. And it just gives, and I know you guys complain about, oh, well, it was a fast, I forgot what the little pink thing is that shows up when you can't get into the market. We used to have that all the time. We called them fast markets. And I'd have an priced order right here and say fast, 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 fast. It goes back up. Oh, you missed it because it was a fast market. It would go through your price, and they just go, well, you didn't get it because it was fast. And I even remember there was times when I would clear trades, we wouldn't get our fills till the next day. Now, can you imagine that? If you put in and you're doing an order on one of these crypto exchanges or on BitMEX, and you put in a market order and you don't know if you're filled or not for 24 hours? But that used to happen. So the markets are so efficient now, it's just incredible. So I consider anybody that is a crybaby, about BitMEX, it says you haven't been there or done that. You really don't understand how these markets work. Because it's a very difficult thing what they're doing, and I don't think that I can't give enough praise to Arthur Hayes.
Well, they opened the door, but they definitely have competition now, which I think is good because you don't want all that liquidity on a single exchange. But I'm gonna go over to John, and also a question: what got you into this market? It's a double question. What got you interested? I'm going to save that one. Let's just say, what do you think about the CME futures, the CME options that are coming? And is that something you're interested in trading with your options experience? Do you feel you may have a competitive advantage over all these Bitcoiners that have no idea how to trade options? Or is the market too illiquid for you? And your thoughts on the potential of a Bitcoin ETF or the current GBTC version of a quasi kind of illiquid ETF? Just your thoughts on trading Bitcoin in traditional markets.
So Tone only threw like 8 questions there. Bitcoin ETF, I don't think's coming anytime soon, a real one. I don't think there's a willingness to do that. But people will synthetically make those up right now.
What do you think the big hurdle is? What do you
The
think?
regulators not understanding it, and there's no central, unless they were able to say, here's the central price that we're going to say, Tone, that this is whether it's BitMEX that Ugg mentioned or any other place, unless they can set a price that will be determined as this is the closing price for it, you can't hardly do it. I mean, it's really difficult. They could take a blended rate of, the top 5 volume exchanges and blah, blah, blah.
Well, they realized with the CME futures after it was launched, they go, well, wait a minute. We don't have enough oversight of the underlying exchanges giving us the price. And they start, putting in inquiries in these exchanges. And Kraken was the first one telling, we're not showing you everything under the hood.
Right.
And it created a little bit of a problem. So that's one CME future thing. And the other one is the CME future going to go to a 24/7 market? Because I can't trade the CME future on Bitcoin because the trade's over the weekend. But they don't. Do you think that's coming?
I think eventually greed will drive the exchanges to list 24/7, eventually. Back in the day, folks, they used to need human beings to do a lot of the stuff that they don't need human beings to do anymore. So you don't need a trading floor. You don't need most of the things that you used to have, Tone, to have trades cleared and so forth. So I think that you're going to see a lot of folks trading away, if you will, on all of these crypto exchanges rather than the CME because there's 24/7 access. And that's what somebody with risk in the market, to Ugly's point, especially as the institutions get involved, they can't be locked out and trading on the CME if the CME is not trading 24/7 and the Bitcoin is. I mean, literally, crude oil and gold trade 24/7 around the world. So they, realizing this, trade, I think, 23 and a half hours on the CME for those two commodities.
It is
crude oil
still
and gold.
closed on Saturday. It closes Friday night, doesn't open till Sunday evening, which, again, Bitcoin may change all that. Like, because of Bitcoin, if the CME puts out the CME contract for Bitcoin 24/7 or 23/7, I mean, how much longer before the gold community and the oil community says, hey, if you're doing it for Bitcoin,
Right.
why aren't you doing it for oil and gold and silver and other commodities?
Well, John,
In all likelihood, it will.
do you
Go
think
ahead.
do you think that'll start transitioning over to some traditional products?
I do. And I think, like right now, folks, options are what I cut my teeth on. And options only trade from 9:30 New York time, 9:30 Eastern until 4 or 4:15, depending if it's the S&P futures options and so forth. A lot of people complain about that because they say, I bought a bunch of Dropbox calls and I want to trade out of these Dropbox calls, but I can't until the day after because they come out with earnings at 4:15 and I don't get to, I can trade stock against it, but I can't trade those options. So I think ultimately Bitcoin could, just as Alex is implying, be a driver for 24/7 trading of the traditional financial stocks, options, and futures.
Though that part I actually like because my option strategies revolve around earnings and that kind of problem. So for me, I'd have to come up with some new strategies. But thanks for that insight. Actually, I'm going to stick with you to drive the next round.
Okay.
And this was the other question. What got you interested in Bitcoin? And the reason why I ask is you are almost the same age as Peter Schiff. You guys are almost 1 year off.
Your friend.
Oh, well, so the guy that first told me about Bitcoin is sitting immediately to my right. rubs it in all the time.
Oh,
that
but
I-
I'm sure he told Peter Schiff around the same time.
rubs it in that I didn't buy it at 300 or cheaper. But I've known Max and Stacy for a long time, and they were nice enough to focus me on it. But I traded one and I got out because it was just too volatile, I thought, at the time. Now, that was a dumb trade. I could highlight hundreds or thousands of dumb trades for you guys, but that's not why I'm here.
So how come you get it, but Peter Schiff can't get it?
I sat with let's see. So my brother Pete and I, every year for ALS research, we auction off a trip to the New York Stock Exchange and come to see us live on CNBC, take you out to dinner and all that kind of stuff. One of these generous folks paid like $70,000 for that 6-hour experience, if you will. And that person brought his best friend, who was Peter Brigger. Peter Brigger is the founder of Fortress, or at least the co-founder of Fortress. He's former Goldman guy, and he went out to San Francisco and founded Fortress. So other than Stacy and Max, my next time that I got somebody just saying, you're an idiot if you don't buy this, was Peter Brigger, founder of Fortress, who has, at that time, $1 billion worth of Bitcoin. And he said, John, just buy it, put it away, hold it. He said, trust me on this. And this is, a guy that swings around with a pretty big bat. So I said, I think that's a good idea. So that was the first time, Tone, that I really got into it and began trading it and holding it primarily. I did sell as it, went parabolic. Didn't get out of it, though. Kept 90% of it, folks. So I'm not up here saying, oh, I'm one of those guys that sold at 19,000. No, I sold at 18, but only about 4 or 5%, and it came crashing all the way back down. I didn't get a single other trade off. So I'm that idiot. I'm telling you that, full disclosure. But luckily, they got me focused on it, and it became clear that it was, just as Max said, a brand new asset class that was really exciting and that had a lot of promise. And that's why I'm here.
All right. You want to add anything, Ugly, or I'll jump in on a slightly next different topic?
No, I got questions for this guy.
Go ahead. Ask your question. Go ask away.
Yeah, I'm just curious. What do you think? I agree with you on the ETF, but what do you think if we have a truly deliverable futures contract? Wouldn't that be the equivalent or better than an ETF? That's what I've been saying.
Oh, no, Mike, in the mic.
It's a synthetic at that point. It's a synthetic ETF if you marry those futures.
Better than an ETF. And I have another question. Since you're more involved in the, you're not a clearing member, Futures Commission. Okay. Is Backit deliverable to my private address? Why I'm reading it, it's kind of secret. They haven't disclosed it. It seems to me like as long as you have a good relationship with a Futures Commission broker, you can get the Bitcoin.
That's very possible, Ugg, but I am not an expert on that. Alex might be able to say.
That's a great question, actually. Maybe we should buy a contract and let it run its course and see. But we haven't had a fund that has taken a physical delivery yet.
Okay, well, the ones that are they're special, the FCMs that are doing it are special. I mean, what is it? One broker, the one you use? That one broker?
Interactive brokers. One
Interactive
broker is the one that got
They-
shut down.
Yeah, one's the one that got shut. Interactive broker, and I found out I had an old firm that I worked for, and I got an old retirement program that's $30,000 in there. So I'm trying to get it. That's so much hassle just to move that thing over there. I got to work through that barrier, but that's what I want to do. We need to test that thing because if we can take physical delivery to our private address, that is the ATF. That is the ETF. That's it. And I think it's coming.
Very possibly.
All right, Max, you want to shine your thoughts on the ETF or the CME futures or options?
Well, the ETF, as I understand it, that the custodian problem is a problem for the ETF. I think it's interesting that GBTC is kind of a hybrid security, right? It's available in some places, not available in other places. It has a premium that kind of goes up and down, and but that is certainly suitable for most people looking for easy tradable security to get into Bitcoin on the grayscale BTC. So it's not a true ETF as such. On the financial innovation side, getting back to Chicago, I had a really interesting conversation with Jack Mahlers last year, talking about, he was envisioning a difficulty adjustment futures contract, because the difficulty adjustment is kind of the secret sauce of the whole protocol in a lot of ways. And it's the one variable that is the least, it's the hardest to hedge against. And so it's a real need for a product like that. So now here's a guy, he's a young guy who lives in the Chicago maw of trading beasts. And, if someone's going to come up with something like that, it could really break this market open in a huge way. That kind of innovation, so deep, would really open this whole thing up.
I have a question for John, actually, and his thought.
Go for it.
And maybe Max as well. The, with all the hype around an ETF, and we're all, the Van Eck guys and whatnot, do you think, just even though it would be meaningless to us, more or less, would it create more attraction, adoption from the regular folks out there?
Would it attract attention?
From the non-professionals.
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, look at BlackRock. I mean, there's a company that they just decided to resell the stock market as an ETF, and now they custodian $1 trillion or more of stuff, right?
But is it a positive, you think? Is that what
It would be a positive for Bitcoin adoption. The only caveat, of course, is that with the introduction of derivatives, you have the possibility of price manipulation, and which is, there's a lot of conversations around that, and I'm curious what John thinks about it, because that, he's on the front line dealing with this all the time. But in the case of precious metals, we know that there's a lot of talk about, for example, in the COMEX market, which is a cash delivery market, and that people don't take physical delivery. There's a lot of problems with matching orders at the end of the day. Under Reg Show, I believe, you have to have buyers and sellers match up, in these exchanges. And there seems to be an awful lot of sell orders that never get matched on these exchanges. And they go in the queue, and they're supposed to, and months go by, and they're still trying to match these orders, and they're like, oh, wow, there are all these sell orders. We don't know where they came from. But a lot of that is anecdotal and part of the rumor mill. So you don't, how much of that is, John, how much of that is based on, the naked short selling in the precious metals market? Is that, what do you see there? Is that mostly nonsense, or is that a real issue? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's probably very real, Max. In particular, I would think that, for instance, there were firms that have paid big fines, folks, for manipulating the NASDAQ market. What happens, of course, is that they have expirations of options. Options expire in many cases on the third Friday of the month, in some cases on a weekly basis on the close. Some products even expire on the opening print. And you have firms that have paid massive fines for manipulation of something as big as the NASDAQ. Because, when we're talking about 100 different stocks in the NASDAQ, with the biggest ones in the world within that index, all of the FANG stocks, the MAGA stocks, and all that stuff. I loved it when they started calling them MAGA stocks, too. Because they threw Microsoft in there and they decided, let's call it MAGA.
$1 trillion MAGA.
Yeah,
right?
Trillion. So when you're talking about $1 trillion being flipped, and you can basically manipulate that market, can you manipulate something that's not nearly as big, for instance, with Bitcoin and so forth? Absolutely. And
So
it's one of the
is
things
it a
to worry
double-edged
about.
sword? In other words, you're saying, okay, we're going to open this up to derivatives, but are we opening a Pandora's box where the price is going to be, it's going to have difficulty adjusting higher because there's a lot of folks who don't want to see it go higher. There's like a lot of people don't want to see gold go higher because they considered it a competition to gold. So and to add another element to this, of course, Trace Mayer every January 3rd, he has his proof of keys, which is like, okay, if you think there's too many derivatives, fake orders out there, just pull your keys from the exchanges. Are market makers and financial professionals aware that the hodlers of last resort can ultimately fuck them?
It's probably something that some of the smarter ones have figured out. But just to give you guys an example from the regular world that I'm in to this world, how many people in the audience have been watching or trading Virgin Galactic? Space, SPCE is the symbol.
Well, watching or trading is very different.
Yes,
but,
it is.
I've been watching and talking about it, and I wish I was trading it. But
So-
there are people here that I know are in that trade
All right.
very nicely.
Luckily, through the algorithms that we use, we found a lot of people buying it in December at right around $11 a share. Last week it hit 40.
They
And
selling?
that's in
They're
a
selling?
month and a half, folks. It hit 40.
Oh, Tesla did something similar.
But this is that's almost a quad.
Yeah.
But that's
Tesla
back
double.
too.
Yeah.
This is now, and here's the reasons. Short squeeze, yes. To Max's point, you can get short squeezes off in these things. Second point is insiders own 72% of SpaceX. Of Virgin Galactic, symbol SPCE. They own 72%. Of that remaining 28%, 25% of the 28% at least is short. So talk about something that can be really manipulated. To Max's point, could the hodlers screw the ETF or anything else? Of course they could, because they're like the equivalent of those 72% of insiders with Richard Branson and everybody else that aren't lending those shares out. Those insiders are hodling, and that means you've got just 28%, and those folks are trying to trade it, and it's just zooming higher all the time.
So I have a crypto question I want to ask, but I do want to stay on a traditional market because I actually do love traditional market. And I guess this goes to you, John, because you trade traditional markets. I just don't understand. Like, to me, shorting Tesla or shorting Virgin Galactic or shorting any other company that is actually building something for the future, as opposed to shorting, let's say, the current banking sector, shorting some of the older technology stocks. Like, I can't even understand shorting, like, Twitter. I don't know when the last time they innovated. But, like, how could you short Tesla? Because everybody wants a Tesla. I know they could be overvalued, but the hodlers of Tesla, they're not looking at next earnings report. They're looking at what the earnings report is going to be in 10 years. And that's why they're holding it. So, like, to me, shorting Tesla is like shorting Bitcoin. You can get a little short-term gain, but is it really worth it? Because I just don't get it. Like, what is the reasoning behind shorting something like that?
Well, they're breaking it down on fundamentals, and they're saying, look, they don't make enough to support this valuation.
But Amazon was a decade they were losing money?
Yeah, very, very true. I think when you've got a situation like that, as differs from what might happen, to Max's point and to Ug's point, with Bitcoin, you have to secure a borrow. You can be a naked short, which is technically illegal to be a naked short, meaning you haven't secured a borrow in the case of Virgin Galactic or Tesla. But what happens is, of course, that they get more and more of the hodlers of those stocks that are basically saying, don't lend my shares. If you're on margin, they can lend your shares without your permission. If you're not on margin, you can say, don't lend my shares. That's what a lot of people do when they want to create a squeeze. Clearly, it's what's been happening here. And then the firm gets bought in. What does that mean? That means they literally are forced to go into the market and buy it, which is why you see that big hockey stick.
And if you want to see a real example of this, watch the show Billions, season 1. I think it was like episode 3 or something, where he was being short squeezed, but he knew the stock is going to go in his favor, so he just had to hold it out. And I don't know if you guys saw that.
I did, and they do a decent job with many of these things on Billions. They miss out a lot, and they basically go a little bit over the top with some of the things, like you're breaking into a warehouse to see how many, ho-hos they have or whatever. But again, to your point, at least with stocks, they've had to secure borrows, and they get people like the head of Overstock.com that goes crazy. Literally, he seemingly went crazy.
Yes.
Chasing these,
Patrick
guys
Byrne.
who were Patrick Byrne,
Yeah.
who were naked shorting Overstock.com, and then eventually he snapped and said,
And he became a Bitcoiner.
Well,
And once he
at
lost
the-
his mind, he transitioned over to Bitcoin.
Well, he had
Right.
he had moved
He
over,
moved over.
but then he claimed that somebody from the FBI told him he had to sleep with a Russian agent
That's right.
or something like that. And it's like, what the hell are you talking about, Patrick?
Yeah, that's Bitcoin derangement syndrome. Once it kicks in, look at Roger Ver. He was normal. Now he's insane. Look at Craig Wright. He was almost a normal guy. Now he's a stark raving lunatic. But, in defense of short selling for a second, Tone, the whole price discovery mechanism needs, equal access for buyers and sellers. And buyers have margin, and sellers, you can't have a margined sale unless you're in a margin account and you're shorting and you're borrowing, to short, essentially. So the price discovery is better represented if you have actors in the market who are shorting stock out of a margin account, out of a leveraged account, because you're putting up 50% margin typically, as you would on a margin buy. So you get a better, cleaner price discovery. If you don't have short sellers out there, you're going to have this drift, higher, and it'll be like frickin' China, where they outlaw short selling, and it's just overinflated, and then they get coronavirus, and now they go back to the Middle Ages. That's not good. We don't want that. We want accurate price discovery.
All right, let me that was good. Let me ask one more question in the world of the Bitcoin space. Now, this is Unconfiscatable Bitcoin, not blockchain conference. Not blockchain, obviously it's not a shitcoin conference. And Max, when you got into Bitcoin, there was no shitcoins. It was just Bitcoin.
Right.
So this question may not apply to you. And Ugly, when you were getting into Bitcoin, I think you started watching my channel pretty early. Yeah. So you realized real quick what shitcoins were. So that wasn't really, so you weren't going to get
based on your recommendation. I sold all my Ethereum. Yes, that's correct.
Excellent. I hope it wasn't at $5 before it went to 1,600.
Yeah, it's about $5. Maybe.
Damn. Sorry about that. It'll go back there. You're certain of it like I am. But I do want to ask John and Alex, because you guys came from the traditional space. And did you get caught, like perhaps someone trying to sell you fake Bitcoins? Or have you seen any of your clients like think they're holding Bitcoin and in reality they're not? And how is that affecting the space?
I've not had people try to sell me fake Bitcoins. I've had people that came to me, especially institutions that wanted to buy Bitcoin, and virtually every time, I probably had, the last time my wife and I, it was into New Year's Eve. Into New Year's Eve, for a month, I'd been trying to match up a $227 million print in Bitcoin. And I found the buyer. The buyer came to me, but I found a seller who was willing to sell and showed the wallet. We saw it. We did a test trade and so forth. We knew this was, but I would say, Tone, that we have, I maybe had seen 4 real trades out of 100, because everybody that came to me was fake. Every single person was fake. Some of the buyers,
from both sides, the buyers with the cash and the sellers with the Bitcoin?
I'd say 80% of the time both were fake, and maybe 20% of the time the buyer was real and I knew who the buyers were. It wasn't the Winkle vibe, but it was people through them that I'd met that I know are real and that they had the money to transact if they wanted to, that were saying, can you get me, 50 million? Can you get me 70 million? Blah, 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 because they were getting their funds off the ground and so forth. And in almost every case, the sellers were all fake. Or it was compromised Bitcoin that may have been involved in Silk Road that nobody wanted to touch.
I want to clarify things, Tones. I didn't get rid of all my Ethereum because I did have a pretty sizable balance on Cryptsy.
David Silver, he'll get his hands on it eventually. Is I think when Bitcoin hits a certain price, he's personally there. They are. He's personally gonna go to China maybe after the recent situation over there. Probably doesn't want to fly there now. He'll personally go look for Big Vern because he wants that private key.
I mean, just to finish up there, we haven't had anybody with fake Bitcoin, but
Well, you know what I mean by fake Bitcoin,
yeah.
right? Like someone pretending that they're selling
have
Bitcoin
that
when they're
all the
selling
time.
some other coin.
like Nigerian emails every day, and I'd say 99.9% all fake.
And any of your clients get caught on that stuff, and then you have to rectify the situation?
No.
Like they bought, let's say, even Bitcoin Cash or something, thinking that it's Bitcoin. They're all pretty sophisticated,
These are all ex-Citadel, ex-Morgan Stanley guys.
so they know what they're doing. So on that note, are any of them interested in altcoins, or are they sophisticated enough to realize that Bitcoin is the future?
That's a great question. I mean, I think the majority of them are very Bitcoin-centric, but I think when you, and John will be able to clarify this, but when you're a professional trader, I think it comes down to the arbitrage, opportunities. So I think, some of them will dip into other coins named other than Bitcoin, just to create that arbitrage.
And to Alex's point, when we're talking about Tesla or SpaceX, a company with no revenue, they haven't sent anybody up there yet, right? I mean, testing it, yes, but they've not sent people up into space, and yet the stock has exploded. The people on Wall Street and the institutions that want to get involved in this space will only really focus on Bitcoin. Much like Tone, they are maximalists. Why? Because they don't understand a lot, but what they do understand is there's a limited amount of this. And the asset gathers its value by its scarcity. So if you've got any of these other shit coins that are out there with 38 billion of them floating around, Tone, nobody wants to buy that crap, because if you make the leap to get into this stuff, unless you're just an insider in a coin sale and you're going to be able to flip this to somebody else as soon as it goes up on BitMEX or wherever it might go, none of these guys want to touch anything but Bitcoin.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yes, and they actually warn everyone by their own definition of terms, because all the altcoins are better than Bitcoin, okay? And then the other thing, they tell you right up front, and so they're telling you that Bitcoin's a standard, and the second thing they do is they tell you that the altcoin is a season. Exactly, it's a season, and that's all it will be.
Awesome, thanks. All right, hey, we do have time for like a question, maybe two. So just coming up to the front, and I'll hand you the mic. So just that mic does. But before we go to a question, quick thing in one sentence. By the next halving, so about 4 years from now, like what price do you think the next Bitcoin pump can go to? Well, everyone on this panel is a little bit of a hodler, I'm sure. We'll start on that end. Max, what are you thinking going into the next halving?
I think all fiat currently trading will be worth zero. I mean, the price of Bitcoin is infinity, because against fiat, it's infinity, because all fiat's going to zero. Against gold, okay, that's another question. And I recently upped my long-term projection of price target from 100,000 to 400,000 last week. I was on Alex Jones. Some of you may have heard that. That's based on the analog to gold. Gold's roughly $7-8 trillion.
But is that within 4 years, or is that just your overall outlook?
I hate giving price targets time targets, because I think the best message I can do in my position in the media is just to stack sats. If people start trying to time markets, they almost 90% of the time lose. I mean, I was an option trader on Wall Street for many years, and how many options go to option heaven?
A lot.
Most, right? Expire worthless, and because it's better to just stack sats. So I don't like to give a time for that reason. But I'm not a trader. I'm not we're the Tone, and you guys are, you're professional traders, and you approach it in that way. This is more like the fiat money's collapsing, stack sats. If it's the digital gold 2.0, then it's going to 400,000. And it doesn't matter if it's 2, 3, 4, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. That's a 40x return, and you're not going to get that anywhere else, Not even close. And it's unconfiscatable. It's indestructible. And, don't fuck around. Just stack sats.
All right, guys. I do want to get to a question, so real quick, just give us a number. Number.
100,000.
Ugly number. 4 years.
Okay. I don't make predictions. I know what, I'm long and I hodl. And I believe that Bitcoin is going to bring back the gold standard in nation states. And so as far as dollars, infinity.
150,000, 4 years.
All right, cool. Okay, one quick question.
So just following on the question of keeping traditional markets open 24/7, comparing traditional markets and let's say platforms like Deribit and FTX, right now their options volumes are decimating the traditional markets. Is that something that'll continue in the long term? And do you see that being because of the regulation, it being more open? And also how much of that might have to do with just Bitcoin being a form of collateral?
I think that most of the traditional brokerages that are getting, or exchanges rather, sir, that are getting into this space, everybody from the ICE, the Intercontinental Exchange, to BACT, the CME with, the couple big firms in Chicago and so forth. All of these guys see that volume and clearly are very attracted by it. But they need to get to that 24/7 or they won't be able to compete. And the fact that these guys are offshore with this stuff in almost every case means that those who want to avoid tax will continue to trade through a VPN and trade on those exchanges to avoid tax.
I have a follow-up to that, John. Do you think, perpetuals were created unregulated? I don't think the SEC would have approved those. Do you think that more now that BACT and ICE are coming into the derivatives market, that there's going to be a second look at possibly approving a perpetual so that it knocks down the OKEXs, the BitMEXs a little bit?
I would not be surprised if that was the case, Alex. In other words, I'm agreeing with Alex.
I don't trade options. I don't plan to unless I start writing them. The money's in writing options, not buying puts and calls.
All right, thank you so much, guys. Again, let's have a hand for Max, John Najarian, Ugly Old Goat, and of course, Alex Mascoli. All right, thank you, guys. Grab that one. All right, we're gonna take. Do we have time for a break? Can we just take a quick 5-minute break? Hey, guys, if you do have a gold bracelet,